Perfect. All right. So we're going to do, in our time together, do you have constraints for your time? Okay. If we're going to talk about inventory analysis, I'll give you some general concepts that go along with inventory. We're going to talk like we're in the know on inventory, get to kind of used to some of the terms and the techniques that we have here. And we talk about two general techniques with inventory. One is called ABC analysis, and the other is called EOQ, but actually we go a little bit beyond that. We talk about some order quantity inventory models. We're going to talk about some different styles of analyzing inventory, and through all of that, kind of come up with some best practices for inventory management. So let's get a bunch of vocabulary and some general concepts out of the way before we dig right into some of the principles of inventory. And when we deal with inventory, we're really dealing with three things. We're talking about planning, coordinating, and controlling. We're talking about planning. How do we figure out what types of supplies do we need, who needs them, and when they need them? We're talking about coordinating. We're talking about how do we get them from point A to point B, although in many situations we know that inventory supply chains can be quite long. We're talking about controlling, which is our way of saying, how do we understand at any given point where things are? How do we use the knowledge we have of these functions to better serve our customers and to better optimize the approaches that we have? So a few more concepts to really dig into here. The first is when we talk about types of inventory, we really deal with four types of inventory. We deal with raw materials. Think about these as your component parts. These are the pieces that we need in order to make that final product. So if we think about the sweatshirt that you're wearing right now, those raw materials could be the fabric, but of course the raw materials to the input to the fabric would be the thread, and the input to those would be whatever type of chemical process we use to make the thread, because I'm pretty or whatever cotton we picked in order to make that thread. Work in process inventory. Well, we might get that fabric. We can consider that to be a raw material if that's kind of our base beginning point for making your sweatshirt as we are in the supply chain. Think about work in process as, all right, we've cut out the fabric into the patterns. We've begun to sew them, but we're not done yet. So these are things that are in various stages of completion, but not completed. When we get things completed, that becomes a finished good. And those are either the items that we sell ourselves directly or we distribute through the next point in the channel. Maybe you do both. It does happen. The other type of inventory is a bit more conceptual. It's called safety stock inventory, and we'll go over this in a bit more detail. But in essence, this is how much inventory you keep on hand so that you don't run out of stock later on. Right? Taco Bell has a big pile of taco shells in the back, just in case they get a bunch of people that want tacos. Let's talk a little bit about the value chain, because that's a pretty important concept. Is there someone trying to come in?
Yeah.
Who is it?
I don't know.
Who are you? Who is it? Okay, not for us. This is all being recorded, by the way, so hello. Let's talk about the value chain. So here we see, look, the mouse does work, how we have our standard suppliers into the value creation product, goods and services that come as a result to post-sale services. In all of our cases, we've got kind of those four different types of inventory. This one we really haven't talked about, repair and replacement parts. Think about these as helping with the goods and services that we have, either in those that come back to us because they need repair or fix, or these also could be considered items that would help make our supply chain work. So supply supply chain. If we've got a production line, you got to have the oil for the production line. You've got to have other types of raw materials. And there's a funny story with that. Have you ever had a Kit Kat? Okay. Cultural reference, making sure that people know. So a Kit Kat is comprised of chocolate over top of kind of like a crispy wafer, and then kind of like this composite material that keeps the crispy wafers together. That composite material is actually just ground up Kit Kat. The production line was so demonstrably bad at first that they would have a tremendous amount of waste. And so instead of just making it waste, they reconfigured the design of the Kit Kat. So they would just, all this waste, they would just grind up and make into the Kit Kat. So, yeah, Kit Kat has some repair and replacement parts within it. When we deal with any type of inventory, we also have to remember that we're dealing in a global supply chain. And so the decisions that we make often have international implication. And we're not going to spend too much time talking about the choices we make and how international monetary policy would affect what decisions we come to. We're going to just say that we need to kind of keep that in mind, that our choice of technique, our choice of information system is all going to be governed by this recognition that we live in a globalized economy, and so we need to scale sometimes to that level. Another thing that is just very straightforward and something to mention is the concept of environmentally preferred purchasing. What this says is that we look at the triple bottom line of our inventory system. It may not be the most we may not achieve the highest amount of cost savings we can get in particular areas, but we might select options that better balance our environmental concerns with other cost bases. Where do we really get into this? We get into it with a lot of waste, right? So if we have a inventory system that is notoriously wasteful, or that we have products that have to have some type of disposal mechanism, or we have items that have some type of recycling component to them, maybe even a mandatory recycling, then we really, really care about this stuff. All PC manufacturers are required to allow you to submit your old system for recycling. Go buy an Apple computer and they have to give you a box to ship the other back. Two things that I'll mention. One is that we're in a world of supply on demand. Sometimes we call this an inventory on demand cycle. What does it mean? It means that just in time we'll be receiving the goods that we need. And so because of this, we encounter significant coordination challenges that only information systems are able to help us to effectively manage. Boil this down though, you really have two questions. Whether we're dealing with a global system, whether we're dealing with an environmentally friendly system, whether we're dealing with some type of just-in-time system. Two major questions. First one is, when do we make an order? And the second is, how much should that order be? Those two questions are going to cover 95% of our inventory management decisions. So keep questions in the back of your mind, and let's talk a little bit about some type of costs that we have that come along with inventory. I mentioned just in time because it's a strategy designed to limit the amount of inventory you have on hand. It's because there's a lot of costs that come with inventory. We have costs with making orders even. So suppose we're working at the bookstore. Well, we have to put in our book orders for the next year. Maybe we decide we don't want to staff or don't want to stock all of the books for a particular class, but we'll make a second order if we sell out. So we then have two orders. We have are inventory holding costs. So how much does it cost for us to actually keep inventory on the shelves? Now, a book is a pretty easy thing, right? You just need to have a ceiling overhead, you need to have some location that you can store it. It's very different than, say, I don't know, beer, right? Beer you might have to keep chilled, so you've got refrigeration costs, you've got the potential for pilferage costs, right? People swiping what you've got. If you're a bartender, then you might even have a spillage cost. You could have a spoilage cost if you keep it for too long. It's a good that may require insurance. And then you've even got other costs, right? A cost could be the more opportunity cost. So if you've got all your money trapped up in a bunch of cases of beer, that's not money you can spend somewhere else. So we would say that it's not as liquid as that could be. For those listening from home, very funny joke. Price liquidity. All right. Other things that we've got costs that come from not having enough or from having too many. If you have too many items, what do you have to do? You better discount them. So if you've got too few items, well, you've got the lost opportunity of sales. And harder to quantify oftentimes is the goodwill that's lost. Right? You can only go to Taco Bell so many times if they're out of tacos before you go somewhere else entirely. The final item that I'll mention is the unit cost, which seems rather straightforward, but can actually become pretty complicated. That unit cost is how much we pay for a given item. Now, talk to anybody who buys a car and you'll hear, oh, well, it's not the sticker price that the dealers actually pay. Right? It's the unit cost is the cost for us for a particular good to acquire that into our inventory. Okay. So there are a few characteristics that we'll use to help us to understand how to manage our inventory. And I'll go over these in a little bit more detail. The first one is the number of items. Now, when we track our inventory, the common way of doing that is through SKUs. You've probably seen SKUs if you've ever looked on the back of one of your products and you see that barcode. Pretty traditional way of recording an individual type of consumer good. More recently, we've started to use some additional technology. RFID tags are very popular. Those cost between a cent and a nickel, depending on the size. You can get those sewn into garments. Sometimes you find them in your books. Passive RFID tags, which is what those are, have a coil, and if they get hit by a radio frequency of a particular frequency, will vibrate just enough to cause a charge, which will ship back a number to you. So that's how those things work. We need to think about the type of demand that we have for our product. We could have demand that is based solely on the product that we have. People naturally buy peanut butter, but we also have a dependent demand. People typically don't buy jelly without peanut butter, right? Although, it does happen, but not the two tend to drive demand in one another. Peanut butter more so to jelly. We have static demands. That's saying that the demand really doesn't change over the course of time. Peanut butter demand is pretty straightforward. Other items have a bit more of a dynamic demand. Fashion is perhaps the easiest way to think about this. Certain fashion items might be really hot, and then they might not sell anything. Pro tip, if you like an item over at the bookstore, think about how many other people will like that, and then wait for it to go on the sales rack. That's dynamic demand. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about different ways that we can consider our inventory. And the first is ABC analysis. Now I have a video that goes along with this talk that I just recorded that talks about how you actually do ABC analysis. Essentially what you're doing is you're taking a look at the totality of your inventory to determine what matters most. Some people will say, oh, it's the most expensive things. Some people will say it's the things that we spend that we sell the most of. But the reality is it's a composite value of the two. Right? If you have a lot of things that don't really sell that much, even though they might be expensive, they may not equate to a large total of your sales, versus maybe you're spending a ton of time shipping out certain items, but you're really not getting much for it. Those don't need to be your top priority. So this is a way of kind of gauging them. The ABC is a concept for saying, all right, let's do a 3-group category. Just tends to be pretty standard. It also follows the Pareto principle. So about 60 to 80% of your total sales will come from your items in your A group. C group about 5 to 15%. I'm sorry, B group about 5 to 15%, and C group anything left. Our maximum inventory would be how much we would have on hand at any point in time. And time T is how long it would take for us to sell out that amount of inventory. Average inventory being kind of the midpoint between the two. So, I mean, it's a practical concept. You can say, on average is how much inventory I have on hand. I don't think it's a very valuable concept for us, though, because if we're not looking at Q, which is how much space we need, how much resources we need to carry the largest amount of inventory that we'll have at any given point, well, then you don't have the room for it. So it doesn't matter if your refrigerator is storing 1,000 cases of beer or 2,000, you're paying the same refrigeration costs. So let's talk a bit about inventory, and there are 2 costs that come along with it: holding cost and ordering cost. Now, I mentioned about some of the challenges for holding inventory: pilferage, depreciation, taxes, breakage, spoilage, insurance, spillage, and the liquidity cost. We generally express holding costs based on a percentage cost of the unit. So if you've got a super premium beer, it costs $8 a case. Not very premium, but $8 a case. Holding cost might be 25%. So we would say per annum, for that $8 case of beer, we could spend $2 holding it in inventory. Ordering costs are typically a fixed cost. It costs us a certain amount to prepare an order. Yes, those are variable in many ways, but for us, we'll just keep it simple and say that's a fixed cost. Every time we make an order, it's going to cost us X amount of dollars. The question is, how do we balance out the two? Our total holding cost is going to be equal to our annual cost times the annual cost rate times the total number of inventory we have. So if we've got 1,000 cases of beer, and that's a 25% holding cost, well, that's going to be $250. Following the economic order quantity principle, then we would say that, we really only have to deal with half the inventory at a time, on average. So, I don't know. I don't care for this too much because I don't think it's true to reality. Next. Ordering cost. How much inventory do we need? How many orders do we make? How much does it cost for each order? Say we have 10,000 items that we sell per year. And it costs $50 to make an order. If we make 2 orders of 5,000 units, that's going to be $100. The composite of the ordering cost and the holding cost. The reason there are 3 different ones is because you've got 3 different discounts. So if you get a no discount, well, this is going to be your line. It's up higher because things cost more. Now, it's dashed from 1,000 over because if you buy less than 1,000 items, that's when this line actually takes effect. Our next discount, that 3%, really all the line that matters is from here to here, because that's the total amount of inventory, 1,000 to 2,499 that we would order, and from here, 2,500 plus would be this line. What you're actually doing is looking over here at the total cost, and you're looking to see what the lowest number is. It's not going to be any of these, because you can't get those. It's only the straight line. So from here to here, it turns out that this is actually a little bit lower than that dot. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying here is that in our case, in order to optimize our cost, knowing how much it costs for us to do a holding cost of a roll of paper towels, I guess 25%, then our best case is to buy just enough to jump into category discount 2. So everything that I've talked to up until this point has been based on some type of static demand, or as we might call it, there's a word that just escaped me. Probabilistic and non-probabilistic is not that. Oh, it'll come back to me. Probabilistic demand is when we don't know what our demand is going to be, or it could be variable. In this case, we generally use an incremental analysis process to figure out how much it's worth for us to get one more item, or for us to have one less item. In our case, we've got two equations that we care about. What happens if we don't sell enough? In that case, we've overestimated demand. If you overestimate demand for the sweatshirt, well, you have to discount it in order to make it move. Sometimes you might have to discount it more than the actual purchase cost. Sometimes not. So say your sweatshirt costs you 20 bucks to buy as a bookstore. You had them on the shelf for 40 bucks. You have to discount them to 15 bucks. You lose out $5 per sweatshirt. You don't lose out 20. We also have underestimating demand. That sweatshirt, if we could have sold 5 more, that's really only 5 times the distance between what we listed it for and what we paid for it. So 5 times 20. So we're really only at $100. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Final couple points I want to make deal with the types of ways that we can create systems to handle how we want to order and when we want to order. In this first one, it's called a fixed quantity system under stable demand. So demand is stable, it's set. We have an inventory position which tells us that once we get to a certain point, we place an order before we reach 0. So this point from our order placed to our order received represents our lead time demand. Notice we never dip below 0 because we have a fixed amount of usage. We don't always have that. Sometimes we have probabilistic demand. In this case, we've got that quantity reorder point with probabilistic demand. We've got a line here that represents our order point. Anytime our inventory hits below that amount, that reorder point, we order a fixed amount of inventory. That fixed amount of inventory equals however much inventory that we that we need, right, our lead time demand based inventory, but also sometimes extra inventory. We call that safety stock. We can calculate using some methods so that we don't find ourselves in a stock out situation except for a certain percentage of the time. And actually we can use normal distributions to help us to figure that out, how much safety stock that we should have. That's a bit beyond the scope of the class, but I wanted to show that that's something that you might be looking to do. So that was based on fixed demand. Let's talk about probabilistic demand. And in our case, we want to look at a periodic review model with probabilistic demand. Fancy for saying at a set point, we buy more product. So that review period is, if you notice, is actually the same each time.
So instead of hitting a certain percentage or quantity of stock left, it would be like every 4 months we
Exactly. Exactly. And what we do is instead of getting some type of floor amount, like, oh, once you get to this point of purchase, right, then that's based on our lead time demand. And what we say is, you know what, we're always going to order X amount. Or we're going to order, actually in this case, we're going to order enough to get us up to some replenishment line. So say this is cases of French fries. If we've got 30 cases and our replenishment line is 100, we'll better order 70 cases here. If we're in this case, maybe we're ordering 90 cases. Oh, we sold out of French fries. A different variant to that, we still have the fixed quantity system with highly variable demand. What this is telling us is that once we hit below a certain inventory level, we place our order. So that's really going to be the important point. So, oh, we're doing good, we're doing good, we're going to, uh-oh, we're out of a certain good. Let's place a particular order, and that order is going to be the lead time demand plus some amount of safety stock.